Good afternoon. I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that I'm the last speaker. The bad news is that I'm actually going to speak. What I would like to do fairly quickly over the next few minutes is to put a slide up there. Is to put what we've been talking about all day in context. Mark Twain is an American author who said, "History never repeats, but it often rhymes." George Orwell, 1984 is the book, of course, you all know. But in 1944, the war is going on, and he wrote a letter to a friend. And he was thinking about not just the problems that he saw in Germany, in Italy, and in Spain, but throughout the world. And some of those words ring true, I think, today, particularly at the end. Economic nationalism and a tendency to disbelieve in the existence of objective truth. The past doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. We have lost our belief in the objectivity of truth. The dictionary last year introduced a new word called truthiness. Truthiness apparently is, well, it could be true or it could be not true. It's somewhere between here and there. We don't have truth anymore. And that's at the core of our problem. The context is this. We've had the best 75 years in the history of the planet. Since the end of the two world wars, we have been on this virtuous circle. Democracy begot free trade, begot growth, begot human development, and so on. Every person on the planet, every country on the planet is literally better off today than it was in 1945, than it was in the 70s and 80s and 90s. It has been a magnificent run. The question for you, for all of us, have we run out of steam? What is the date on the tombstone for ascendant liberal democracy? You just heard a panel that suggests it could be soon. The question is, where exactly are we? Let's go back there. Where are we? The fact of the matter is that liberal democracy has stopped producing for too many citizens in too many countries. The Edelman organization did a poll at the start of the year, global poll, 28 countries, 13,000 people, and they're asking about trust. And they're asking about trust in countries, in governments, in businesses, in nonprofits. And they concluded that we are in free fall, that people don't trust almost any institution anymore. And they summarized that up and asked a question, is the system in your country failing? 53% of the people on the planet said yes, the system is failing. Only 15% said the system is working, and we suspect we know who those 15% are. And then the few left in the middle said, don't really know, not very happy about things. But the point is that most liberal democracies are no longer producing what they were supposed to produce. Part of the problem, the second point, is that globalization without bumpers. I don't know if any of you bowl, but when I was learning to bowl years ago, the alleys where the balls go if you don't bowl straight capture all the balls if you're a starting bowler. But if you put bumpers in those alleys, then you always hit something. We've done globalization without bumpers, and it has been too costly for too many people in too many countries. Yes, there have been winners from globalization, individuals, companies, even some countries at the time. But overall, globalization has been too costly. Democracy is getting old. We have failed, as you've heard all day, to reinvest in democratic institutions. We haven't rebuilt things. We haven't reimagined how democracies ought to work. We haven't figured out, is democracy in 2018 supposed to be different than it was in 1918 or 1818? We've let the music play too long, even as the center of gravity is shifting from west to east, where liberal democracy exists in only very few places. So if you were to take a snapshot of the globe today and think about what's up and what's down, you would probably conclude that democracy has some problems. And finally, we've talked about it all day, polarized voters increasingly are looking for populist and even authoritarian solutions. The Ipsos Mori people did a poll earlier this year all over Europe and the United States, some other places, and the question was, would you like a strong leader or a weak leader? Everybody wants a strong leader. Then they refined the question. Do you think your country needs a strong leader to replace rich and powerful leadership that ignores you? 70% of Americans said yes. 70% of Frenchmen said yes. 65% of Germans said yes. We're looking for solutions, and we're looking for different kinds of solutions. I was trained as an economist a long time ago, and so I tend to go back to economics when I try to explain things. Those numbers are appalling. Since 2005, 500 to 600 million people have seen their incomes drop, either stagnate or drop. That is 2/3 of all the people in the advanced countries. That tells you that the economics are broken. Yes, we had a recession. Yes, it was a very bad recession. Most people in most countries are still in that recession. Can it be any surprise that they raise doubts about whether the system is working for them? Any surprise that they're skeptical about democracy? Any surprise that they think their leaders, as Scott has pointed out, are in it for themselves rather than for the people? I would argue we're in the process of replacing that virtuous circle with this disastrous spiral. And it really was the financial crisis that kicked this off. This describes Greece fairly well, but I think it also describes many countries through Europe, through the Americas, and elsewhere. The financial crisis gets a response of austerity. Austerity makes recession deeper. The deeper the recession, the social contract between governed and the government gets broken, gets stretched. That produces what I call the politics of resentment. That is exacerbated by rising inequality. One number. In 1990, the three large American automobile makers earned revenues of about $250 billion that year. They employed 1.2 million people to generate those revenues. In 2016, the three largest Silicon Valley companies had about the same amount of revenues. So in terms of generating income, they were about the same size as the autos were back in 1990. But those three companies employed only 137,000 people. We have managed to create technology that doesn't need people to create value and wealth. That, as has been said several times today, exacerbates inequality, and that spins this circle tighter and tighter. The question is, where does it go? We've been talking today about polarization. You've heard about global versus local, community-based solutions. The suggestion that Uri returned to a couple times, think he said, who benefits from polarization? Like a good scientist, he doesn't believe things just happen, but that there might be some cause. I'm not going to attempt to review all that, but clearly one of the issues facing all of us is whether we can solve the issues confronting us at the community level, at the national level, at the European level, at the global level. Scott is the pollster, I'm not, but I believe that polls give you a good sense of the temperature, and as you all know, we asked all of you to take a poll. So what I'd like to do before I finish in a few moments is compare some data for the rest of the world to you. This work was done for the BBC at the end of last year. The question was very simple. Do you see yourself more as a global citizen or a national citizen? And it was a worldwide poll. It is not surprising, perhaps, that people outside the OECD want to be more global. The Chinese want to be more global. The Indians want to be more global because those countries see themselves as in the ascendancy. They have more to gain by being global, whereas the industrial countries, more people see themselves or fewer people see themselves as global. Very specific question by country. Are you more a global than a national citizen? You can see the answers. The Spanish, perhaps because of some of the reasons we heard a moment ago, are the most global people in Europe. That probably says something about conditions in Spain. They want to belong to something other than Spain. But the Greece numbers, 47% of Greeks told the BBC that, yes, they consider themselves much more global than they do national. What do you consider yourselves? We circulated that poll, we got a good result, and this was the answer. We gave you three choices. A citizen of the world, a third of you said yes. A citizen of Europe, 29%. A citizen of my nation, which is mostly Greece, 27%. The point being that more than 50% of the people that participated in this conference see themselves as something, as a citizen of something bigger than their nation state. That makes sense if we live in a world where the problems are bigger than the nation state. Greece is ahead of the curve. What about Muslims? This again is a Chatham House piece from earlier this year that Rob Niblett referred to. It's hard to read, but the blue lines are the relevant ones. Should all further Muslim migration be stopped, the blue lines are the agrees. Only 2 countries in Europe, Spain and the UK, are under 50%. More than 50% of all the people in all of these European countries firmly believe we should have no more Muslim migration. Not quite clear how they're going to do it, but they believe it. And it's partly because they have a very unfavorable view of Muslims in general. Again, you can see the numbers. If you look at these numbers, the UK, of course, is the lowest because they've had and have integrated a Muslim population because of the empire. Germany is a surprise. France has a very large Muslim population, which they've integrated over a long period of time. When we had our talk-out session, one of the women suggested we need to figure out how to integrate people. That data would suggest that the countries that are better at integrating in Europe are, in fact, less unfavorable towards Muslims. Now the question to you, how do you feel about immigration? And I have to say I was surprised, and I have to congratulate you. The Stavros Niarchos Foundation invites the right people to these things. Almost all of you say you have a moral obligation to help refugees. That is unique in my experience. Do immigrants make your country better? Almost 2/3 said yes. By contrast, in Germany, it's 25%. Does it fit my culture? Not really, but that's okay. Do immigrants make me feel unsafe? Answer, only 11% said yes. In Germany, it's almost 50%. Again, those are probably the kinds of attitudes we need in order to address some of the problems that we've been talking about today. Now, even though I'm married to her, she's going to throw me off the stage in a moment, but I would like to leave with just a couple of things for you to think about. We obviously all agree we're on the wrong path. It's not just the 70% of Americans. Most people think we've got to do something different. I think these are the 4 things we've got to think about. We need to figure out how to get our economies growing again, or it is all over. Stop, end of discussion. And that growth has to be better distributed, and it has to be equal. We need to re-inject ethics into leadership. That's part of the reason the Tällberg Foundation has a very powerful leadership initiative. Absent different leadership, it is also clearly we cannot succeed. We need to figure out how to manage, not be managed by technology. We are about to have a burst of disruptive technologies that it will literally change everything you know about how the world works. The nature of life, the nature of war, the nature of work. 10 years from now, everything will be different. If we don't manage that process, that vicious spiral will become more vicious. And finally, we've got to reimagine how we govern ourselves. We have left the toolbox on the table. They built something nice years ago. We don't care to reinvent it. If we don't reinvent it, we won't survive. And most particularly the question I think we all have to try to answer, can we make democracy work again? Because if we don't, the alternative, as George Orwell imagined back in 1944, probably is going to be something worse. On that, I would like to thank you for having survived the long march of the day since 9:30 this morning. This program on polarization was the brainchild of Andreas Dracopoulos, who is with us much of the day. Andreas told me that he is persuaded that we really need to address these, we need to parse these issues, we need to think about these issues, and we have to come up with some solutions. And he hoped that today, these several days, would be the beginning of that. Thank you very much for your time, your attention, and I leave you in much better hands. Thank you very much.
Please interact with our panelists and our moderators and each other and ask your questions then. Thank you to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for a really great day, and thank you all for coming. Bye.